my precious little dragons, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I am just going to do a quick little wrap-up video. What am I saying? My videos are never quick. I'm going to attempt to do a quick little wrap-up video for the Asian Readathon and May the Force Read With You readathon that I did in May. So I almost completely successfully accomplished my goals. However, because I am a mood reader, I didn't technically get to everything I listed. I sort of subbed some stuff in and out, so I'm just kind of going to go through the books that still managed to squeeze in there that I just kind of adjusted as the month went on. So it's kind of like a monthly wrap-up, which I've never done before, but we'll see how it goes. If you like a wrap-up format and want to see more of it, I mean, you can let me know. For whatever reason, I never thought anyone would be that interested in like hearing like brief little wrap-ups of what I read in the month, because I feel like I do that over on my Instagram, because I like do like, I say a mini review. It ends up being more than a mini review, but I do that over my Instagram, so I'm like, why would people want to see it in video format? But if you do, let me know. I'm just buying time while I pull up my reading challenge. Oh gosh. Technically, today is the last day of May, so I will maybe finish Shadow and Bone today before the end of May, and therefore complete that goal. But I may not, so we'll count that as a half. Alright, so for my Asian Readathon, I had 4 books that I had planned for, and I actually did read all 4 of those, so I successfully completed the Asian Readathon. The 4 books I read were The Wolf of Oren-Yaro by K.S. Villoso, The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme, Weijun, Wang, The Joylit Club by Amy Tan, and The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. So those were my 4. And then I also read Arsenic and Adobo by Manansala. I also read They Called Us Enemies by George Takei, and An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I can't speak today. I live in an enemy. Words. An Ember in the Ashes was also technically for the May the Force Read With You readathon. Because it's an Asian author, it technically also counts for the Asian Readathon. So those 7 books are the ones that fit for the Asian Readathon. So I'm going to very quickly go through them somewhat in the order I read them. So the first one I finished reading was The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. This is a translated work, and I will just say I absolutely adored it. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. I connected so deeply to it, and I don't often love like animal focused books where the animal is the narrator, but I mean, Nana was so sassy and just seemed to embody a cat so much. It didn't feel contrived, which is I think what a lot of times animal narrators tend to feel to me. Like, it just doesn't feel right. They either try to be too human or tried too hard to make them seem like an animal, and Nana as cat narrator just felt perfect to me. But also just the story in general is so simultaneously heartwarming and heartbreaking. I mean, I was literally sobbing the whole last 4 chapters. I was so emotionally invested, and it was just, like I said, it was very heartbreaking but also heartwarming, and then like, I don't know, it just leaves you with this almost bittersweet feeling because there is a lot of sadness in that book. Like, I'm tearing up talking about it. Oh my gosh. It's so good. If you haven't read it, I would highly encourage it. Even if like literary fiction is not necessarily your thing, I just think it's such a valuable book. I think it has so many beautiful things to say. It's written in a lovely manner. And actually, I've been doing my Japanese the whole month of May because I kind of bounce back and forth between languages on Duolingo, but I solely did Japanese for the entire month of May. And like I said, because this was the first one I read for Asian Readathon, I had just started doing my Japanese again and get back to it. I finished reading this and I loved it so much. I was like, I want to keep doing my Japanese until I can read this book in the original Japanese, because like, it's so beautiful translated into English. Like, I can only imagine how beautiful it is in the original Japanese. So maybe one day, I don't know how long it will be because I suck at reading kanji. It might be a bit of a struggle to read through that one, but I'm very tempted to just try. We shall see if that ever actually happens. The next one I read was The Wolf of Oren-Yaro by K.S. Villoso. This one is the first in a series, and I had kind of mixed feelings about it. Like, I enjoyed it. I had like a few different problems with. However, this was the group read for the Vintage Wine and Books Club, And when we did the live chat for it, I actually appreciated it a lot more after the live chat, just hearing everybody else's opinions and what they enjoyed about it and everything. So I think I got a lot more of an appreciation for it after the live chat. That was really fun. That was also the first live chat I'd ever participated in. Like, I mean, I wasn't like one of the people on the little screen or whatever, but like I participated in the chat part and it was really fun. Yes, but it's based off a pre-Spanish Filipino culture. It is that very sort of dark, gritty sort of fantasy, which isn't the typical fantasy that I read, but it was pretty interesting to me. I give it 3.5 stars, like I said. Rounded it up to 4 on Goodreads because it's stupid and doesn't allow half stars. The way it was set up, I was almost expecting political intrigue, and then that was broken in like the first 2 chapters, and I'm like, oh, this is a just survive book, which that was good in its own right. I particularly loved the character of Kine. He was really cool, or Kine, I think his name is supposed to be Kine. I don't know how things are pronounced. Tally, the main character, is really interesting. There were sometimes like her choices were just like, why are you doing that? But like they made sense for the character, so whatever. There were some things that were like abrupt, especially towards the end, that I wasn't a fan of. For the most part, the story worked pretty well. And yeah, I was like, I'm sort of intrigued to pick up the next book, but it's not like super high on my priority list, but it was also like a good read. Like, I'm not mad that I read it. It was interesting, and like I said, I did really gain more of an appreciation for it and the things that are happening in the story and the overall plot that are being looked forward to in the coming books from the live chat. So next I actually read in Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. So I had a lot of fun reading that one. I ended up rating it 4.5 stars. It was kind of like my perfect fantasy. It had a lot of intensity. I was super engaged with the characters. I loved the morality of it. Like, I loved seeing Elias I love seeing moral characters that are raised in immoral societies, immoral situations, and seeing how they grapple with that and sort of come to terms with it. Like, I think that's really fascinating, and I loved the way Tahir did it. I loved the spy novel aspect. Like I said, the characters were so engaging. I loved Helene. I thought she was also interesting. Like, the morality of both her and Elias, because she's very much, I'm good as long as I'm good to the people that I like, that are around me. Whereas Elias is much more like holistic, like, in order to be good, I need to be good to everyone, even the ones that like our society looks down upon, even these other cultures, even, you know, like his views are much broader, whereas Helene's are more focused. And then Elias, obviously, she's obviously cool. It's just like, I think her setup for a character was more typical, but she was still really interesting. And I think I'm definitely going to be reading the next book for that one. I'm very interested now. It is very much a brutal, cruel world. I think from what I can tell, Tahir seems like a kill your darling sort of author. I have no faith that all the characters are going to survive to the end. That's what I have to say about that. Oh, I also loved the Roman-inspired world. That was fun. They Called Us Enemy by George Takei. So this is a graphic novel. I read it all in one sitting, as you are wont to do with graphic novels. This one I rated 5 stars again. It was very powerful because obviously it's about George Takei's own personal experience living in internment camps during World War II with his family. And so he not only takes you through the time in the internment camps, but kind of walks you through how it affected him later in life, like the conversations he had with his dad and his teenagers about it, how he sort of dealt with all the emotions and anger that came with that, and how it shaped the rest of his experiences going on to his career as an actor and later an activist and everything. It was just very powerful. I cried multiple times. I loved the way he talked about his parents, how they made the best of bad situations, how his father sort of stepped up to be a leader in the camp. Just talked about a lot of really horrible things, but in a beautiful way. And when I say beautiful, I don't mean that to like romanticize a horrible thing. I mean it in the way that it was beautiful, the way he wrote it, the way the art was. And it was beautiful in pointing out these moments of goodness, these moments of showing how much his parents worked to make the experience good for them. Like his mom bringing treats, so they were just having a fun adventure on the train ride because he was really little, his siblings were really little, and so he talks about this dichotomy of realizing later, like as a teen, how horrific the experience of the Japanese internment actually was, contrasted with his own childhood memories of kind of just having fun because that's just what life was and he went along with it. And so it was really interesting to see his perspective on that and talk about it. And I also just really appreciated being able to get that firsthand perspective of what it was like to be in the internment camps, because I think that's something that we don't often talk about in the US. That's a part of our history that we just sort of sweep under the rug, and it needs to be talked about more. So I was very glad to have read this, and I would highly encourage anyone who has not to read it, because it will take you an hour. It's worth it. The next one I read was The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. This one was really interesting format. So it actually was in these 4 different sections, and then it follows 4 immigrant mothers and their 4 American-born daughters in San Francisco Chinatown. This kind of moderately have a main character, but not really. Each section has individual sort of like glimpses or pieces of a different person's life. So you start off with the mothers in China, and then you go through in a semi-linear fashion through to the daughters, and it was just really beautiful. It talks about everything from immigration to abuse to different ways of viewing the world between the mothers and the daughters. It deals with familial relationships, obviously. It was just a really powerful, unique novel, and like I said, I haven't seen a novel really that's formatted like that before, so it did take me a while to sort of get into it, and I rated it 4 stars, which was partially that, like, it just, like, it felt a little, like, odd to me at first and disjointed, but then I was like, okay, it, like, I kind of got the picture of it, and it helped at the beginning to have like sort of a glossary, like these are the mothers, these are the daughters, this is who's connected to who, so I could sort of keep track of it as we sort of hopped all over the place in the different chapters. And then, like I said, by the time I got, even though I think looking back at it, I actually enjoyed the stories earlier on better, but once I settled into the flow later, so I was enjoying myself more later. It's hard to describe that reading experience, but it worked out, is the point. And I really enjoyed it. And it had a lot of really, it was really good at weaving together these 8 different narratives, which is hard to track that many characters in a fairly short novel. I mean, it's like this big, it's not that long. So I think it's a very, very well written book. And lastly, for Asian Readathon, almost lastly, is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia Manansala, and I adored this one. I gave it 5 stars. It was just so much fun. I love cozy mysteries. I especially, for some reason, love food-themed cozy mysteries, which this is. It's about a girl named Leila, and she is back in her small hometown. Her hometown literally could be mine. And I don't mean that like in a sense of the vibe. I mean that in a sense of literally, because it's like a small-ish town, but like a county hub sort of small rural town 2 hours outside of Chicago in Illinois, and I'm like, does she live in my hometown? What? But she doesn't. She's apparently from Chicago. She captured that rural vibe very well, but I also appreciated that she put diversity in a rural town, because I think a lot of times people are like, rural areas are monolith, they're all white. And I'm like, some of them are, but it's not like diversity doesn't exist in rural areas. I could go on a whole rant about rural areas. Not like a rant mad about rural areas, but a rant about how rural areas are just so mistreated and underrepresented. There's a reason I'm specializing in rural psychology. Anyway, that's not the point of this. The point is, I loved this book. It was so much fun. Cozy murder mystery, perfection. I cannot wait to read the next one, because it just felt like home. I loved it. I loved the family aspect. I loved all of the food. I made Tita Rosie's chicken adobo, and it was delicious. I really want in the next book to have the recipe for Leila's ube crinkles cookies, but it was not in this book, but maybe in the next one, please. I really want to make them. Anyway, so I read that one. And then the last one I read for Asian Readathon was The Collected Schizophrenias, which is a collection of essays about Esme Weijun Wang's personal experience living with schizoaffective disorder. But she also just talks about experiences with psychotic disorder, with different psychotic disorders as a whole, which is why it's called The Collected Schizophrenias. And also just talking about how, you know, it's not just one diagnosis. There's a lot of nuances and individuality to the experience of psychotic disorders, and that it was really moving. And you know, I'm going into clinical community psychology, so obviously this one was a really good read for me, because it's always really good to get that first-hand perspective, you know, because there's only so much you can learn from textbooks and reading vignettes and stuff. You have to really get those first-hand accounts and remind yourself constantly of the humanity and the personal experiences of those who live with these disorders. It's not just a disorder. There's a person behind every disorder. And it was so beautiful. It was eloquent. There was a lot of moments that were hard to read, especially when she talked about, you know, for instance, her experiences with psychiatric hospitals, involuntary hospitalizations, just talking about the stigma surrounding psychotic disorders, schizoaffective and schizophrenia particularly. And yeah, it was definitely really hard to read in some points. I think anyone that's in a medical profession should read that book. Anyone that's in a helping profession should read that book. Like, not just people who are going into clinical psychology. I think everyone should read it, but I think especially people that may at some point have interactions with people who have psychotic illnesses, to really gain a better perspective and understanding of what that actually means. Because every single person will have a different presentation. No one person is going to be the same. It's still so stigmatized and so misconstrued in our society that you really need to value and hold up highly these sorts of memoirs, these sorts of first-hand accounts of what it's like, of what it actually means, of what it is and is not. You know, yeah, I won't go into like a whole in-depth review because I could be here for a while talking about it, but it was very, very, very good. For the May the Force read with you, this is the one I did not totally finish. It's okay. We're flexible with our reading. I had put The Mists of Avalon or Jane Eyre, Shadow and Bone or A Gathering of Shadows, The Wolf of Oren-Yaro, which obviously we talked about, and Ember in the Ashes, which we already talked about, and The Travelling Cat Chronicles, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, as well as A Ceiling Made of Eggshells. So, the ones I did not finish. I didn't get to The Mists of Avalon, A Gathering of Shadows, or To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which I feel bad because I've been trying to get through To Sleep in a Sea of Stars since December, and I still haven't finished it yet because I'm just like, it kind of lags at the midway point. I just haven't gotten the gumption to finish it. I'm like, I think it, from what I've heard, it picks back up again, but I'm just like, I just need to get through it, but whatever. Like I said, I'm a third of the way through Shadow and Bone, so I may finish that by tonight, but I'm liking it so far. Jane Eyre was my first time reading through the whole thing, and I actually really enjoyed it. I loved Jane Eyre's voice. She deserves better than Mr. Rochester, but I feel like that's the consensus of almost everyone. I'm not going to talk about Bertha because I need to do a book look where I can just go on a whole rant, honestly. But I also feel like I don't have anything to add to the conversation that hasn't been said by literally everyone. So maybe not, I don't know. But it was still really good. I really enjoyed it. I thought Jane was a really fun protagonist. I loved her spunkiness and how she was so, like, justice and fairness meant so much to her, and she stood up for what she believed in, but was also like really humble and demure at the same time. Like, she was a really interesting and well-written protagonist. I appreciated it. And then A Ceiling Made of Eggshells. I also really enjoyed that one. Oh, I guess I could talk about ratings. I think I gave 4 stars to Jane Eyre, and then A Ceiling Made of Eggshells I also gave 4 stars to. And A Ceiling Made of Eggshells, I am definitely going to do a book look on that one because I made the mistake of reading the Goodreads reviews and I disagree with so many of them. And I got so frustrated. I'm like, I have to do a book look on this because I have to defend this book, which it's not even my favorite Gail Carson Levine book. Like, I mean, because Ella Enchanted and Fairest have a special place in my heart. They're not going to be replaced. But this is a really, really good book. And I can see where some people are coming from. Because they were like, well, the plot is slow. I'm like, well, yeah, it's a slow-paced book. And they were like, well, it's a middle grade book. It should be fast-paced. I'm like, not necessarily. Like, middle graders can take slower paced books, that's fine. Not everything has to be action-packed, it's okay. But this is a book about the Spanish Inquisition and the Jewish expulsion from Spain during the reign of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. And it's from the perspective from a Jewish girl named Loma. And it follows her from ages 7 to 16. And I thought it was really well written. I really enjoyed it. And yes, it was a little slower paced, but I also pretty much finished it in one sitting. Like, I started off with the audiobook and I wasn't clicking with the audiobook after the first chapter or so. So I switched over to the physical book and I read it all in one sitting. I really enjoyed it. And especially it does pick up at the last third because, you know, the expulsion eventually happens and so things kick up as they will. But I think it had a lot of really valuable things to talk about different aspects of Jewish identity, and part of the book was Carson Levine exploring her own Sephardic heritage. I think you can tell she absolutely did her research. She was really passionate about the topic and it was so well done. And to me it actually sort of read like a classic because I had just finished reading Jane Eyre and I thought it kind of read very similarly to Jane Eyre. Like, obviously the plots are not similar at all, but the way it read to me felt like a classic because it does kind of have this slower pace. It describes things in detail. It takes its time to build things up, and it cares more about the characters and about talking about these more big sort of topics, general themes, than it cares about like having a tightly woven narrative or having really fast action. It's a little bit more methodical and thoughtful than that. And I thought that was really unique, especially for a middle grade book. And I think it's really good to have different types of fiction for children to read. You don't just want to give them all action books and then have them get into adult literature and not like it because suddenly they're like, well, all these books are too slow paced because they're used to reading really fast paced books. I thought the characters were done really well. It had a lot of things to say. I definitely have to do a book look on it because I can't go into so much detail here, but it was very well done. I really enjoyed it. It definitely is different than your typical middle grade novel. It was also really unique and fascinating. And I loved that Gail, Carson, Levine didn't shy away from showing a very different culture to what we have now. You know, for instance, Loma, it was normal back then to marry as soon as you had your bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah. You had your passage into adulthood and you got engaged and then you got married and you had babies. And so you could very conceivably be a mother, be a full adult by 13. And so one of Loma's biggest wants in the novel is to have children because she adores children, and that's one of my favorite parts of the entire novel is just following her and how much she dotes on her family and loves the children in her family and wants to be a mother. And Gail, Carson, Levine doesn't shy away from like really taking a look at a very, very different culture to what we have now. Like, and not trying to really view it through a 21st century lens, just trying to show it how it was and still show spunky and, you know, really independent protagonists, but in the context they actually lived in. And I really, really appreciated it because I feel like that's so hard to do, to remove yourself from your own viewpoint of like, oh my goodness, she's a literal child, and like, well yeah, but it's our view of a child as opposed to like, in their view, she's a full-grown adult. Things were different. So I thought it was really well written, and I feel like it could spark a lot of conversation and be a really good book to discuss. Especially if it is a person's first introduction to sort of anti-Semitism or that period in history. So I feel like that would be a really good book to like sort of read through and have a discussion about with your child, or maybe like in a classroom. So just to kind of also say, the other two books that I read this month were The Maid by Nita Prose and Dead Red Girls by Nekesa Afia, but they didn't fit into either of the readathons, but I just thought I'd mention that I read them this month. So if you're interested in seeing my sort of mini non-spoiler reviews on any of these books, you can head over to my Instagram, which is also a novel beauty. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had for today. I just wanted to sort of take you through a wrap-up. I thought it was a pretty successful reading month. I was happy with everything I managed to accomplish. You know, even though I didn't completely finish everything, and overall I really enjoyed everything. I mean, I think the lowest I gave something was a 3-star this month, and I mean I just tend to enjoy most things, so it's not like unsurprising that the lowest I rated something was 3, but you know. But yeah, I just had a good time this month, and I'm glad I got to participate in some readathons and really focus in on expanding the literature I'm reading. Oh, I should also mention May was also Jewish American Heritage Month, so even though the Sealing Made of Eggshells takes place in Spain, I was kind of counting that for this past month because Jewish rep, so just thought I'd mention that as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. Stay magic, keep reading, and I love you all so much. Bye!